Who sent you? The question came from the man whose eyes had turned every server in the restaurant into a trembling mess tonight. But I wasn't trembling. I was calculating. 3 days ago, I was invisible. Just another waitress in a city that chews people up and spits them out without bothering to learn their names. Tonight, I'm sitting in the back of a bulletproof Mercedes, wrist still burning from where he grabbed me, heart pounding not from fear but from the electric shock of being seen for the first time in 3 years. My name is Amelia Mercer, and this is the story of how I went from serving overpriced pasta to dismantling a $70 billion conspiracy that could have toppled an entire criminal empire. This is the story of how the most dangerous man in the city looked at me, really looked at me, and saw not a victim but a weapon he desperately needed. But before we get to the part where I'm racing against a 72-hour deadline to save his life and reclaim mine, before we get to the electric tension crackling between us in war rooms and safe houses, before the moment where everything I thought I knew gets shattered into a million pieces, let me ask you something. Have you ever been so good at something that it terrified people? Have you ever had a gift so sharp, so undeniable, that someone had to destroy you just to feel safe? Have you ever lost everything, your career, your reputation, your entire identity, and had to rebuild yourself from nothing while the people who ruined you walked free? If you have, you'll understand what happened tonight. If you haven't, pay attention. Because this story is about what happens when you refuse to stay broken. This is about what happens when the universe gives you one impossible shot at redemption, and you take it, even if it means walking straight into the fire. Hey, I hope you're doing well, wherever you are right now. Maybe you're watching this on your lunch break, or late at night when you can't sleep, or during a commute that feels longer than it should. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Is it cold where you are? Raining? Sometimes I think about how weather shapes our mood, how a storm outside can match the storm inside. Anyway, I want you to stick with me on this one. I promise you, this story will take you places you didn't expect. Dark places. Thrilling places. Places where danger and desire blur into something neither of us can look away from. If you end up feeling even half of what I felt living through this, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to remember that being knocked down doesn't mean staying down. And definitely leave a comment telling me what you think, because honestly, even now, I'm still processing what happened. Okay, let me start from the beginning. I was 24 when my life ended the first time. 24, brilliant, unstoppable. I had a corner office at Meridian Analytics, one of the most prestigious financial consulting firms in the country. My specialty was forensic accounting, the kind that could trace dirty money through a dozen shell corporations and 3 different countries. I could read a balance sheet the way some people read novels. Numbers spoke to me. They told me stories that words tried to hide. I was good. No, I was better than good. I was the person they called when billion-dollar deals needed vetting, when mergers looked too perfect, when someone suspected the books had been cooked but couldn't prove it. I found things. I always found things. That's why they targeted me. The Volkov family. If you know anything about organized crime in the city, that name makes your blood run cold. They're not the flashy mobsters you see in movies. They're worse. They're the ones who own half the legitimate businesses downtown, who have judges and politicians in their pockets, who move money so smoothly that it looks completely legal until someone like me starts digging. And 3 years ago, they needed someone to take the fall for a massive fraud scheme. Someone smart enough that the frame job would look believable. Someone without the connections to fight back effectively. Someone like me. They used my own code against me. Software I had designed to track suspicious transactions. They modified it, used it to siphon nearly $1 billion through accounts that traced back to me. By the time I realized what was happening, federal investigators were at my door. My bank accounts were frozen. My reputation was in ashes. I tried to fight. God, I tried. But the Volkov family had covered their tracks perfectly. Every piece of evidence pointed to me. Every digital fingerprint had my signature. My own brilliant work had been turned into the weapon that destroyed me. The firm fired me immediately. Criminal charges were filed. My lawyer said I was looking at 20 years minimum. And then, mysteriously, the charges were dropped. Not because I was innocent, but because the Volkovs wanted me alive and broken, not imprisoned. They wanted me to spend the rest of my life knowing that they had won, that they could reach out and crush me anytime they wanted. So I disappeared, changed my name, dyed my hair, took a job where nobody asks questions and nobody looks too close. I became a waitress at Celestine, an upscale restaurant where the rich and powerful come to make deals they don't want seen. I kept my head down, served food, collected tips, pretended I was nobody, and I survived.
Barely.
Some days I wanted to give up entirely, but there was this small, stubborn part of me that refused to stay dead. That part kept me going, kept me sharp, kept me ready for an opportunity one didn't even know I was waiting for. Until tonight. Tonight started like any other Friday shift. The restaurant was buzzing with the usual crowd. Hedge fund managers celebrating successful quarters. Real estate developers sealing property deals. The occasional celebrity trying to be seen while pretending they wanted privacy. I was working the private dining section, the area reserved for guests who pay extra for discretion. Separate entrance, soundproofed walls, servers who know how to be functionally deaf when needed. It's where the real business of the city gets done, the kind that never makes it into official minutes or legal contracts. My section had been empty until 8:30, when Ben, our head host, came back looking pale. "Amelia, you've got the Leonardo party. Room 3. I remember feeling my stomach drop just at his tone. Ben had worked at Celestine for 15 years. Nothing rattled him, but right then his hands were actually shaking. "How many guests?" I asked. 6. Maybe more. They didn't say. He grabbed my arm, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not make eye contact unless they speak to you first. Do not react to anything you hear. Serve quickly, perfectly, and get out. Understand?" I understood. The Leonardo name was legendary in this city. Andrea Leonardo controlled the Eastern Territories, everything from the docks to the financial district. His family had built an empire on calculated violence and strategic intelligence. They were the counterweight to the Volkovs, the other side of the underworld power structure that actually ran the city while politicians pretended they were in charge. And tonight, Andrea Leonardo was in my section. I checked my appearance in the staff bathroom mirror. Dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Minimal makeup. White shirt, black pants, black apron. Professional. Invisible.
Perfect.
I grabbed menus, took a breath, and pushed through the door to room 3. The first thing I noticed was the tension. It hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. 6 men sat around the table, all of them radiating the kind of danger that comes from knowing you're untouchable. And at the head of the table sat Andrea Leonardo. I had seen photos, grainy surveillance shots in news articles about organized crime. None of them did him justice. He was maybe 35, 36. Broad shoulders that stretched his perfectly tailored shirt. Dark hair that fell naturally away from his face. The kind of careless perfection that probably took no effort at all. Tattoos crawled up his neck, disappearing under his collar. A map of violence and loyalty written on his skin. But it was his eyes that stopped me. Dark, intelligent, calculating. The eyes of someone who saw everything and forgot nothing. The eyes of a predator who enjoyed the hunt. He didn't look up when I entered. None of them did. They were focused on a tablet in the center of the table, voices low and intense. "The price point is insane," one of them was saying. $70 billion for a tech company that barely breaks even? "It's not about breaking even," another responded. "It's about market position. About controlling the infrastructure before someone else does. And the Volkovs are just letting us walk in and take it?" This from a third man, skepticism dripping from every word. After they spent 2 years positioning for exactly this acquisition, Andrea finally spoke, and his voice was like dark velvet. Low, controlled, absolute. "The Volkovs are overextended. They made bad plays in the crypto market, lost significant liquidity. They can't match our bid, and they know it." I approached the table, setting down menus with practiced silence. Nobody acknowledged me. I was furniture. Useful, temporary, forgettable. "Can I start you gentlemen with drinks?" I asked, voice neutral, professional. Whiskey, Andrea said without looking up. Macallan 25, neat. Same for everyone. I nodded, started to turn away. The due diligence came back clean. One of the men continued. Every audit, every financial statement, everything checks out. This is the deal of the decade. And that's when I saw it. The tablet screen, angled just enough that I could see it as I moved toward the door. Financial projections, corporate structure diagrams, acquisition timelines. And there, buried in the subsidiary companies listed under the target corporation, was a name that made my blood freeze. Helix Dynamics. I stopped breathing. Helix Dynamics had been dissolved 3 years ago. It was a shell company the Volkovs had used in their fraud scheme, the one they had pinned on me. It had been thoroughly investigated, torn apart by federal auditors, and officially liquidated. Except it wasn't dead. It was right there, listed as a subsidiary of the company Andrea Leonardo was about to buy for $70 billion. This was a trap. A massive, elaborate, devastating trap. And I was possibly the only person in the world who would recognize it. I made it 3 steps toward the door before my brain started screaming at me to turn around and walk back out of my carefully constructed invisible life. Don't do it, the survival instinct whispered. Keep your head down. This isn't your problem. These aren't your people. You tried being a hero once, and look where it got you. But my hands were already trembling, and not from fear. From rage. From recognition. From the absolute certainty that the Volkovs were about to do to Andrea Leonardo exactly what they had done to me, just on a scale that would make my destruction look like a practice run. I poured 6 glasses of Macallan 25, each pour exact, each movement automatic while my mind raced through the implications. If Helix Dynamics was embedded in this acquisition, that meant shell companies, fraudulent assets, phantom revenue streams. It meant the $70 billion tech company was probably worth a fraction of its stated value. It meant Andrea would buy air and debt while the Volkovs walked away with real money and watched his empire crumble under the weight of worthless assets. It was brilliant, really. Vicious and brilliant. I loaded the glasses onto a tray, my reflection in the polished silver showing a woman I barely recognized anymore. 3 years ago, I would have been excited by this puzzle, energized by the challenge of unraveling a scheme this complex. Now I just looked tired, worn down, older than 27 should look. But underneath that exhaustion, something else was stirring. Something dangerous. When I returned to room 3, the conversation had shifted to logistics. Timeline discussions, regulatory approval processes, media management strategies. The kind of careful planning that happens when powerful people think they've already won. I set the glasses down one by one, still functionally invisible. The closing date is set for Monday, one of the men said. 72 hours from now, we control the entire digital infrastructure platform for the Eastern Seaboard. Unless something surfaces in the final review, another cautioned. Andrea picked up his glass, finally looking up, and for half a second his eyes met mine. It was like touching a live wire. Every instinct I had screamed danger, but I didn't look away. Couldn't look away. Nothing will surface, he said, still holding my gaze. We've been thorough. I should have left then. Should have taken my tip money and my invisible life and walked out of that room forever. Instead, I heard myself saying, the deal is a trap. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. 6 pairs of eyes locked onto me. The kind of attention that gets people hurt, or worse. One of the men actually reached inside his jacket, hand moving toward what I assumed was a weapon. But Andrea held up one hand, stopping him. His expression hadn't changed, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Curiosity, maybe. Or calculation. Excuse me? His voice was soft. Deadly soft. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I'd already jumped. Might as well commit to the fall. The acquisition, I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. The tech company you're buying. It's not what you think it is. And you know this how? One of the other men demanded. You're a waitress. I'm a waitress who can read financial statements upside down from 6 feet away, I shot back. And I'm telling you, There's a subsidiary company listed in that structure that should not exist. Helix Dynamics was dissolved 3 years ago after a massive fraud investigation. If it's showing up in your target company's corporate tree, someone rebuilt it specifically to trap you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Andrea did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. The smile of a shark that's just spotted something interesting in the water. "Gentlemen," he said, not taking his eyes off me. "Leave us." "Boss, you can't be serious," one of them protested. "She could be anyone. She could be working for." I said leave. The command was absolute. Final. They left. Reluctantly, with backward glances that promised violence if I turned out to be a threat. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. I was alone with Andrea Leonardo. He stood up, and I realized just how tall he was. At least 6'2", maybe more. He moved around the table with the grace of someone completely comfortable with violence, stopping close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and dark, like cedar and smoke. "Sit down," he said. It wasn't a request. I sat, mostly because my legs weren't sure they'd keep holding me up. He remained standing, a power play that wasn't subtle, but didn't need to be. "Tell me everything you know about Helix Dynamics," he said. "And choose your words very carefully, because if you're wasting my time or trying to sabotage this deal for a competitor, you'll regret it." So I told him. Not everything, not yet, but enough. I explained how Helix Dynamics had been used as a shell company to hide fraudulent transactions, how it had been designed to look legitimate until someone dug deep enough to realize the assets were smoke and mirrors. I explained the patterns I'd seen in financial fraud cases, the way certain structures always indicated deeper problems. I didn't tell him how I knew so much. Not yet. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Vincent. That subsidiary we discussed, Helix Dynamics. I need everything you can find on it. History, ownership, dissolution records, any connection to the Volkov family." A pause. "No, not Monday. Now." "I'll wait." He hung up, turned back to me. "What's your name?" "Amelia." "Full name?" I hesitated. Giving him my real name meant giving him access to my past, to the scandal, to everything the Volkovs had done to me. But lying to Andrea Leonardo seemed spectacularly stupid. Amelia Mercer. His eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw the moment recognition clicked. The analyst. The one who got caught in that fraud case 3 years ago. "I didn't get caught," I said, anger flaring before I could stop it. "I got framed. There's a difference." "Is there?" He moved closer, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "The federal investigation said you designed the software that siphoned nearly $1 billion through offshore accounts. I did design that software. For legitimate forensic accounting. Someone modified it, used it against me, and made sure every piece of evidence pointed in my direction. And yet here you are, serving drinks instead of sitting in a federal prison. How did you manage that?" The charges were dropped. Mysteriously. Right around the time I realized that fighting back was only going to get me killed. Something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. He knew what it meant to be outmaneuvered by the Volkovs. Everyone in his world knew. His phone rang. He answered, listened, his jaw tightening with each passing second. When he hung up, his eyes had gone cold and dangerous. "You were right," he said quietly. Helix Dynamics was quietly re-established 8 months ago under a different registration. The ownership traces back through 3 holding companies to a Volkov subsidiary. The entire corporate structure of my target company is infected with shell entities designed to collapse the moment the acquisition closes. "They're going to take your $70 billion and leave you holding worthless paper," I said. "And by the time you realize it, they'll have restructured their entire operation. You'll have no legal recourse, no way to recover the money. They'll have effectively bought your territory without firing a shot." He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched thoughts move behind those dark eyes like storms gathering. Then he reached down and grabbed my wrist. Not violently, but firmly enough that I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Come with me. I have tables to serve, I protested, even as he pulled me toward the door. Not anymore. He walked me through the restaurant, past shocked servers and the pale-faced host, out into the cool night air where a black Mercedes waited. One of his men opened the back door, expression carefully blank. Andrea guided me into the car, sliding in beside me. The door closed. The locks engaged. And we pulled away from Celestine, from my carefully constructed invisible life, into something I absolutely was not prepared for. Where are we going? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Somewhere we can talk without interruption. Somewhere secure. He turned to look at me, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. You just saved me from losing everything. Now I need to know who you really are, what you really know, and why the hell you're working as a waitress when you're clearly capable of so much more. The car moved through city streets, past neighborhoods that grew progressively quieter, more isolated. My survival instinct was screaming again, but underneath the fear was something else. Excitement, maybe. Or recognition. For 3 years I had been nobody. Invisible. Safe and suffocating and slowly dying inside. Now I was being seen. Really seen. By someone who understood exactly what I was capable of. It was terrifying. And exhilarating. And I had absolutely no idea if I was being rescued or walking into something far more dangerous than anything the Volkovs had done to me. We arrived at a building in the warehouse district, the kind of place that looked abandoned but had security cameras on every corner and armed guards trying to look casual. Andrea led me inside, through corridors that smelled like concrete and money, into an elevator that required both a key card and a fingerprint scan. You're taking a lot on faith, I said as the elevator climbed. For all you know, I could be working for the Volkovs, sent to feed you false information. If you were working for the Volkovs, you wouldn't have mentioned Helix dynamics. That was the one piece of the puzzle they needed to stay hidden until after the deal closed. The elevator stopped, doors sliding open. Besides, I'm very good at reading people. You're angry, not calculating. Survivors have a different energy than operatives. He wasn't wrong. The elevator opened into a penthouse that took up the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows that I immediately tried not to think about, minimalist furniture, art that probably cost more than I'd made in my entire life. And people. At least a dozen men and 2 women, all of them turning to stare as Andrea walked in with a stranger. Conference room. Now, Andrea said, "Wake up, Vincent, get Paul on video call, and find me everything we have on the Whitmore acquisition. Every document, every communication, every piece of due diligence." They moved with efficient urgency, and within 5 minutes I was sitting at a massive glass table surrounded by people who looked at me with suspicion, curiosity, and in one case, open hostility. "This is Amelia Mercer," Andrea said, and I watched several people react to my name. The fraud case had been major news in financial circles. She's the one who identified the trap in the Whitmore deal. She used to work for Meridian Analytics before the Volkovs destroyed her career. And we're supposed to trust her. Why? This from a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, immaculately dressed, radiating authority. She could be setting us up for an even bigger fall. Because she has nothing to gain and everything to lose, Andrea said. The Volkovs already took everything from her. If she wanted revenge, helping me is a good way to start. The sharp-eyed woman leaned back in her chair, studying me like I was a balance sheet that didn't quite add up. "I'm Teresa Gallo, Chief Financial Officer for Leonardo Operations. If you're legitimate, prove it. Walk us through exactly how this trap works." They slid a laptop across the table to me, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt my hands hover over keys that could do more than take food orders. The screen displayed the acquisition documents, hundreds of pages of corporate structures, asset valuations, regulatory filings. I took a breath and dove in. "Here," I said, pulling up a subsidiary map. "Whitmore Tech shows 17 subsidiary companies. Looks normal for a company this size. But watch what happens when you trace the ownership chains." My fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over. I pulled up corporate registration databases, cross-referenced filing dates, highlighted connections that shouldn't exist. Helix Dynamics appears here, registered 8 months ago. But look at the registration address. It's the same address used by 3 other subsidiaries, all of them established within a 2-month window. That's not normal corporate growth. That's coordinated construction. I pulled up another screen. Now look at the asset valuations. Whitmore Tech claims $2.3 billion in proprietary technology patents. But when you trace where those patents originated, they come from these subsidiary companies. Companies that didn't exist until 8 months ago. You're not buying established technology. You're buying recently transferred assets that probably have liens or hidden ownership claims attached. Teresa was leaning forward now, her skepticism shifting to focus. Keep going. The revenue streams look impressive on paper. $800 million annually from licensing agreements. But look at who they're licensing to. I highlighted a list of companies. These are all Volkov front operations. They're creating artificial revenue by paying themselves, inflating the company's value before sale. The moment you own Whitmore, those licensing agreements will mysteriously terminate and your revenue will collapse. One of the men at the table swore under his breath. How deep does it go? Andrea asked, his voice tight. I spent the next 20 minutes tearing apart the acquisition piece by piece, showing them how almost every valuable asset was either phantom, overvalued, or contractually tied to entities that would disappear post-sale. It was elegant, really. The Volkovs had built a corporate house of cards that looked solid until you tried to live in it. When I finished, the room was silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of traffic far below. $70 billion, Teresa finally said, her voice hollow. We were about to pay $70 billion for essentially nothing. Worse than nothing, I corrected. You'd be taking on real debt obligations while the assets evaporated. By the time you untangled everything through legal channels, the Volkovs would have restructured and moved the real money offshore. You'd spend years in court and recover maybe 10 cents on the dollar. Andrea stood up and walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. Everyone waited. I was learning that when Andrea Leonardo was thinking, smart people stayed quiet. They didn't just want to take my money, he said finally. They wanted to destroy me. Financially cripple my entire operation, leave me weak enough that they could move into my territory without significant resistance. He turned back to face the room. This was an assassination attempt with paperwork instead of bullets. We need to pull out of the deal immediately, one of the men said. Call it off, walk away before.
No.
Andrea's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade. If we pull out now, the Volkovs know we figured out their trap. They'll adapt, try something else, and next time we might not catch it. Plus, we lose the opportunity to acquire what could actually be valuable technology if we can separate the real assets from the fake ones. What are you suggesting?
Teresa asked.
We go through with the acquisition, but we restructure the entire deal in the next 72 hours. We identify what's real and what's smoke, renegotiate terms to protect ourselves, and turn their trap into our advantage. He looked directly at me. And we're going to need someone who understands exactly how the Volkovs think, how they structure their frauds, how they hide their tracks. Oh no. I knew where this was going. I need you to work for me, Andrea said. 3 days. Help us restructure this deal, identify all the landmines, give us leverage over the Volkovs. Name your price. I don't want money, I said automatically. Then what do you want? What did I want? Justice? Revenge? My old life back? None of those things were possible. The fraud case had destroyed my reputation so thoroughly that no legitimate firm would touch me. Even if Andrea paid me a fortune, I'd still be damaged goods. Unless. I want proof, I said slowly, the idea forming as I spoke. The Volkovs framed me using Helix Dynamics 3 years ago. If that company is active again, there's evidence somewhere of what they did. Financial trails, digital records, something that proves I was set up. Help me find that proof, clear my name, and I'll spend the next 72 hours tearing apart this deal to save your empire. Andrea studied me for a long moment. You're asking me to go to war with the Volkov family over something they did 3 years ago. I'm asking you to let me find evidence while I'm already digging through their corporate structures. The proof is in there somewhere. I just need access and time. And if finding this proof puts my deal at risk, it won't. The same skills that will clear my name are the ones you need to restructure this acquisition. I'm offering you a financial analyst who has every reason to be thorough and absolutely no loyalty to the people trying to destroy you. Teresa spoke up. She has a point. If the Volkovs framed her, she's got more motivation than anyone to burn them. And we can verify her work at every step. Andrea walked back to the table, placed both hands on the glass surface, leaned forward. 72 hours. You work here under guard, with complete access to our financial systems and intelligence networks. You help us restructure the Whitmore acquisition into something that won't destroy us. And in the process, if you find evidence that clears you, it's yours. He extended his hand. I looked at that hand, scarred knuckles and expensive watch, the hand of someone who'd built an empire through calculated violence and strategic brilliance. Taking it meant stepping back into the world that had chewed me up and destroyed me. It meant trusting people who operated outside the law, who solved problems with methods that would horrify my former colleagues. It also meant finally having a chance to fight back. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and sent an electric current up my arm that had nothing to do with business arrangements. 72 hours, I agreed. Teresa, set her up with a workstation and full database access. Vincent, I want every piece of intelligence we have on Volkov financial operations. Paul, start reaching out to our legal team, but keep it quiet. No one outside this room knows what we're doing. People scattered, moving with purpose. Teresa gestured for me to follow her to a smaller office space with multiple monitors and a coffee maker that looked more expensive than my monthly rent used to be. You're either very brave or very stupid, Teresa said as she logged me into their systems. The Volkovs don't forget, and they don't forgive. If they find out you're helping us, what they did to you 3 years ago will look like a warning. They already took everything from me, I said, watching screens load with financial databases and corporate records. I'm not sure what else they can threaten me with. Your life, for starters. She handed me a security badge. This building is fortress-level secure, but don't leave without an escort. Andrea wasn't exaggerating when he said this is war.
People die in Wars.
She left me alone with more computing power and database access than I'd had even at Meridian Analytics. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screens, hardly believing this was real. 3 hours ago, I was invisible. Now I was sitting in a Mafia headquarters, given complete access to their financial systems, tasked with dismantling a $70 billion conspiracy while searching for evidence to reclaim my stolen life. I should have been terrified. And I was. But I was also more alive than I'd felt in 3 years. I pulled up the Whitmore Tech corporate structure and started digging. Not the surface-level analysis I'd done in the conference room. Deep forensic work, the kind that traces money through shell companies and offshore accounts, that finds the invisible threads connecting seemingly unrelated entities. And there, buried in a subsidiary 6 layers deep from Helix Dynamics, I found the first real clue. A digital signature on a fund transfer authorization. The signature was mine. Or rather, it was a forgery of my signature, my old Meridian Analytics credentials, used to authorize a transaction I'd never made. They'd kept evidence of the framed job, hidden it inside their current operation, probably thinking it was safely buried where no one would ever look. They'd thought wrong. I was about to start tracing that signature when the door opened and Andrea walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He set one down next to my keyboard, without asking if I wanted it. Finding anything useful? He asked. Found the transaction they used to frame me. Digital signature, authorization codes, the whole trail. It's buried in the Whitmore structure, probably because they reused some of the same corporate entities. I pulled up the evidence on screen. This proves I didn't authorize that transfer, which means somewhere there's evidence of who did. He studied the screen, his expression unreadable. You're good at this. Really good. Makes me wonder why you didn't fight harder 3 years ago. I tried fighting. The Volkov's own judges, prosecutors, half the financial regulators in the city. Every door I knocked on was already locked from the inside. Eventually, I realized that staying alive meant accepting defeat. And now I have something I didn't have before. A partner who benefits from exposing what they did. I took a sip of the coffee. Perfect, somehow. You're not doing this out of kindness. You're doing this because tearing apart their fraud helps you. That makes us allies of convenience, which is a lot more reliable than charity. He smiled slightly, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less dangerous. More human. You're smarter than I expected, he said. You're less terrifying than I expected, I replied, then immediately regretted it. But he just laughed, a low sound that did strange things to my pulse. Give it time. I can be very terrifying when necessary. Someone knocked on the door. Vincent, the man from earlier, stuck his head in. Boss, we've got a problem. The Volkovs just moved up the final closing meeting. They want to finalize everything tomorrow night instead of Monday. The temperature in the room dropped. They know, I said immediately. Somehow they know we're looking deeper into the deal. They're trying to force it through before we can restructure. Andrea's expression went cold and calculating. How much time do we have? 27 hours until the meeting, Vincent said. After that, if we haven't restructured the terms, we either close on their conditions or pull out completely. Which means 27 hours to tear apart their entire fraud, build our case, restructure the deal, and do it all without them realizing we're onto them. Andrea looked at me. Can you do it? I thought about the complexity of what they were asking. 72 hours had seemed impossible. 27 hours was insane. But I'd spent 3 years being invisible, being safe, being slowly erased. Yes, I said. But I'll need help. Financial analysts, legal experts, people who can verify my work and build the legal framework while I find the fraud. You'll have whatever you need. He pulled out his phone, started making calls. Teresa, we're on a compressed timeline. I need the full financial team here in 30 minutes. Paul, draft restructuring terms for the Whitmore acquisition. Focus on asset verification requirements and post-sale protections. Vincent locked down this building. No one in or out without my personal authorization. He hung up, turned back to me. Anything else?
Food.
I think really well when properly caffeinated and fed. Done. More calls, more orders. And just like that, I went from invisible waitress to the center of a $70 billion war against the people who destroyed my life. The next 6 hours blurred into a fever dream of financial documents, coffee that tasted like liquid focus, and the growing realization that the Volkov trap was even more sophisticated than I'd initially thought. Teresa's financial team arrived, for analysts who looked simultaneously exhausted and wired on adrenaline. They set up in the conference room while I worked through the digital architecture of the fraud, calling out findings that they verified and documented. Subsidiary 7, Quantum Solutions LLC, I said, highlighting another shell company. Cross-reference the board members with any known Volkov associates. 3 matches. One of the analysts called back. All of them appointed within the last 6 months. Market. That's another entity that collapses post-acquisition. Andrea moved through the space like a predator circling prey, taking calls, issuing orders. Managing what I was learning was a vast criminal empire that somehow ran more efficiently than most legitimate corporations I'd analyzed. He'd shed his jacket hours ago, rolled up his sleeves, revealing more tattoos that crawled up his forearms. Every so often, I'd catch him watching me work, those dark eyes tracking my movements with an intensity that made my skin feel electric. Focus, I told myself. You're here to save your life, not develop an inconvenient attraction to a man who probably has people killed before breakfast. But focus was getting harder as the night wore on and the evidence mounted. Around 2 a.m, I found something that made my blood run cold. Andrea, I called out, not bothering with formalities anymore. You need to see this. He was beside me in seconds, leaning over my shoulder close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. What am I looking at? Insurance policies. Life insurance specifically. On key executives of Whitmore Tech. I pulled up the policy documents. 20 million each, all purchased within the last 3 months. The beneficiary is listed as Whitmore Holdings, but trace that back and it's actually a Volkov subsidiary. So, if something happens to these executives after I buy the company, he said slowly, the Volkovs collect. And look at the policy terms. They specifically cover death by violence, kidnapping, assassination. I turned to face him. They're not just planning to steal your money. They're planning to kill key people and profit from it. This isn't a financial trap. It's a murder conspiracy hiding inside a corporate acquisition. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Andrea straightened, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Ben, I need immediate protective surveillance on everyone listed in the Whitmore Tech executive roster. Yes, all of them. I don't care if they don't work for me yet. If the Volkovs make a move on any of those people, I need to know immediately. He hung up, looked at me. What else? There's more, I said, pulling up another document. The acquisition timeline requires regulatory approval from the Financial Oversight Committee. Look at the scheduled review board. He scanned the names, and I watched his expression shift to recognition. 3 of those 5 members have been on Volkov payroll for years. Which means even if we restructure the deal, they can block or delay approval until we're forced to either accept the original terms or walk away entirely. They control both the target company and the regulatory process. I rubbed my eyes, exhaustion starting to creep in. This is bigger than I thought. They haven't just trapped the deal. They've trapped the entire acquisition process. Teresa appeared in the doorway. We've got another problem. The Volkov legal team just filed for expedited review, which means the regulatory board meets in 18 hours instead of the standard 2 weeks. They're forcing everything to happen at once. Andrea was quiet for a long moment. That dangerous stillness I was learning meant he was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. They're rushing because they know we're onto them, he said finally. Which means someone talked. Someone in this building in my organization is feeding information to the Volkovs. The temperature in the room dropped further. A traitor. Of course there was a traitor. Criminal empires didn't survive on loyalty alone. They survived on fear and leverage, and the Volkovs were experts at both. Who has access to what we're working on? I asked. Everyone in this room tonight, Teresa said. Plus the security team, the legal advisors on call, maybe 30 people total. Start with financial pressure, I suggested, slipping into the analytical mode that felt like coming home. The Volkovs buy loyalty. Look for anyone with sudden debt relief, unexplained deposits, lifestyle changes that don't match their income. Already on it, Vincent said from across the room, fingers flying over a keyboard, pulling financial records for everyone who knew about the accelerated timeline. Andrea moved to the windows, staring out at the city lights like they held answers. We've got 18 hours until the regulatory meeting, 27 until the final closing. We're fighting a war on 3 fronts: restructuring the deal, identifying the traitor, and staying alive long enough to see it through. So we divide the work, I said. Teresa's team continues verification on the Whitmore assets. Vincent tracks down the leak. I focus on building the evidence case against the Volkov fraud, both for the acquisition and for what they did to me 3 years ago. And what do? Andrea asked, turning back to face me. You keep us all alive. Something flickered in his expression. Respect maybe, or recognition of an equal. Fair division of labor. He gathered everyone in the conference room, and I watched him transform from the man who'd been working alongside us into something else entirely. The Mafia boss. The leader who commanded absolute loyalty through sheer force of presence. We have a traitor in our organization, he said, voice carrying that dark authority that made people stand straighter. Someone who values Volkov money more than their life. When we find them, and we will find them, they'll wish the Volkovs had gotten to them first. Until then, assume every communication is compromised. Use only secure channels, work in teams, report everything directly to Teresa or Vincent. He dismissed them, and the room cleared quickly, leaving just the 2 of us in the conference space. You should rest, he said. You've been working for 8 hours straight, so have you. I'm used to it. You're not. You'd be surprised what I'm used to, I countered. 3 years of 12-hour restaurant shifts teaches you endurance. He moved closer, and I found myself backing up until I hit the edge of the conference table. He stopped just inside my personal space, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Why are you really doing this? He asked quietly. And don't say it's just about clearing your name. You could have stayed invisible, stayed safe. Instead, you volunteered for a fight that could get you killed. The honest answer was complicated. Revenge, yes. Justice, absolutely. But also something deeper, something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Because I was dying, I said finally. Not literally, but slowly. Every day I spent being invisible, being less than I was, I lost a piece of myself. The Volkovs didn't just destroy my career. They destroyed my identity, made me believe I was someone who could be broken and discarded. I met his eyes directly. I'm done being broken. Even if fighting back gets me killed, at least I'll die as myself. He studied me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression. The calculation remained, but underneath it was something warmer, darker, magnetic. You're not going to die, he said, voice low and absolute. I don't let people who work for me get hurt. I don't work for you. We're partners. Temporarily. Partners then. He reached up, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to touch my face. Instead, he grabbed a laptop from the table behind me, close enough that I could smell that cedar and smoke cologne again. Come on. If you're not going to sleep, you might as well eat while you work. He led me to a smaller room, something between an office and a living space, with a couch that looked more comfortable than my entire apartment, and a kitchenette where someone had left covered plates of food that probably came from a restaurant far nicer than Celestine. We ate in companionable silence, and I realized this might be the strangest night of my life. Sitting in a Mafia headquarters, eating gourmet food at 3 a.m, working to dismantle a $70 billion conspiracy with a man whose very existence should terrify me, but somehow didn't. Can I ask you something? I said between bites. Depends on the question. Why didn't you just walk away from the deal when I warned you? You could have pulled out, avoided the whole trap. Why go through all this instead? He set down his fork, considered the question carefully. Because the Volkovs need to learn that I'm not easy prey. If I walked away, they'd try again, and next time they might not make mistakes I can catch. This way, I turn their trap against them, prove I'm smarter than they think, and gain leverage for future conflicts. He paused. Plus, there's probably real value in Whitmore Tech if we can separate the legitimate assets from the fraud. The technology is genuine, even if the corporate structure is poison. So, it's strategy. Everything is strategy. Must be exhausting. You'd be surprised how energizing it is when you're good at it. He smiled slightly. Kind of like how you looked when you were tearing apart their corporate structure. You weren't tired.
You were alive.
He wasn't wrong. The work had felt like oxygen after 3 years of suffocation. My phone buzzed. My actual phone, the cheap one I used for my Waitress life. I pulled it out, saw 3 missed calls from Ben at the restaurant and a text message. Where are you? The Volkovs sent someone asking about you. Said you left something in the private dining room. I covered, but they seemed suspicious. Be careful. My stomach dropped. They know, I said, showing Andrea the message. They know I'm the one who spotted the trap. His expression went cold and dangerous. When did this happen? Looks like about an hour ago. He made several rapid phone calls, orders issued in that voice that expected instant obedience. When he finished, he turned back to me. You're not leaving this building until the deal closes. The restaurant will be told you had a family emergency. Your apartment will be watched but not entered. And starting now, you're under my personal protection. Your personal protection. Which means you stay in my sight or under guard by people I trust absolutely. The Volkovs don't make social calls. If they're asking about you, they're planning to remove you from the equation. The reality of what I'd volunteered for crashed over me like cold water. This wasn't just a financial puzzle anymore. This was life and death. I need to keep working, I said, hearing the tremor in my voice and hating it. The evidence is in there, both for the acquisition and for what they did to me. I'm close to connecting everything. Then we work together. He stood, held out his hand. My office has secure systems and better security. You'll be safer there. I took his hand, let him pull me up, and followed him through corridors to a space that was clearly his personal domain. Dark wood, minimal furniture, walls covered with maps and screens displaying what looked like real-time surveillance of half the city. He set me up at a secondary desk while he returned to his own work, making calls in Italian that sounded both beautiful and terrifying, managing an empire that never slept. And I dove back into the evidence, pulling threads, connecting dots, building the case that would either save both our lives or get us both killed. Around 5 in the morning, I found it. Andrea. He was beside me immediately. Look at this, I said, pulling up a series of transactions. 3 years ago, the day before I was framed, there was a digital intrusion into Meridian Analytics System. Someone accessed my credentials, copied my authorization protocols, and used them to create fraudulent signatures. The intrusion came from an IP address that traces back to a Volkov-owned building. That proves they framed you. It proves someone using a Volkov computer framed me. But look at this. I pulled up another document. The same IP address was used last month to access Whitmore Tech's financial systems. Same infiltration pattern, same digital signature methodology. Whoever framed me is the same person who built the Whitmore trap. Which means if we find them, we solve both problems at once. They're the key to everything. The sun was rising over the city when Vincent burst into Andrea's office, his face pale and tight with urgency. We found the leak, he said. You're not going to like it. Andrea stood immediately. Show me. We followed Vincent to the conference room where Teresa was already waiting, her expression grim. She pulled up financial records on the main screen. Paul Hendricks, she said. Our lead legal advisor. The one who's been drafting all the restructuring terms. I felt my stomach drop. Paul was one of the people who'd been in the room when I first explained the trap. He'd heard everything, knew exactly what we were looking for, had access to every piece of evidence we'd compiled. How long? Andrea asked, his voice dangerously quiet. At least 6 months, Vincent said. The Volkovs paid off his gambling debts, about $300,000. After that, regular deposits. $20,000 a month to keep feeding them information. Where is he now? That's the problem. He left the building 4 hours ago, said he needed to go home and change clothes. We've been trying to reach him since you ordered the lockdown, but he's not answering. His apartment is empty. Car is gone. Andrea's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of rage in an otherwise controlled exterior. He's running. Which means the Volkovs know everything we've discovered, everything we're planning, everything Amelia has found. There's more, Teresa said quietly. Paul had access to our security protocols. He knows how this building is defended, where the weak points are, which guards are on rotation. If the Volkovs wanted to make a move, she didn't need to finish. They could hit us here, now, while we were exhausted and exposed. Lock it down, Andrea ordered. Full security protocol. No one enters without biometric verification. Double the guards on every entrance. And someone find Paul Hendricks before the Volkovs do, because if they get to him first, he's a corpse and we lose our leverage. People scattered. Phones rang. Orders cascaded through the organization. I stood there feeling the walls close in, realizing that every piece of evidence I'd found, every thread I'd pulled, the Volkovs had known about within hours. They've been watching us work, I said, the horror of it settling over me. Everything I found, every connection I made, Paul reported it all. They know I discovered the insurance policies, the shell companies, the murder conspiracy. They know I'm building evidence against them. Andrea turned to me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine concern in his eyes. Which makes you the single biggest threat to their entire operation. If you testify about what you found, about what they did 3 years ago, their whole empire becomes vulnerable to federal investigation. So they'll kill me. They'll try. The casual certainty in his voice should have been terrifying. Instead, it was almost reassuring. At least he wasn't pretending I was safe. How much time do we have? I asked. Until they make a move? Hours, maybe less. Until the regulatory meeting? 12 hours. Until final closing? 21 hours. He moved closer, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. We can't wait them out. We have to move first. Move how? We take the fight to them. Use what you've found to force their hand before they can eliminate you. Teresa spoke up from across the room. The regulatory meeting is our window. It's public, documented, with federal observers. The Volkovs can't make an obvious move there without drawing scrutiny they can't afford. If we can present evidence of the fraud at that meeting, force the committee to investigate, we buy time and protection. But Paul knows our strategy. I protested. He knows every piece of evidence we've compiled. The Volkovs will have counterarguments prepared for everything. Then we find something new, Andrea said. Something Paul didn't know about because we discovered it after he ran. Something that connects all the pieces in a way they can't deny. I thought about everything I'd found, all the threads I'd pulled. The shell companies, the insurance policies, the forged signatures, the IP address that linked my frame job to the Whitmore trap. And then something clicked. The programmer, I said suddenly. Whoever accessed my credentials and built the Whitmore fraud, they're not just a hacker. They're someone with deep knowledge of financial systems, forensic accounting protocols, and corporate law. That's a specific skill set. Rare enough that there can't be many people in the Volkov organization who fit the profile. Vincent was already typing. I can pull employment records, known associates with tech backgrounds, anyone who's worked in financial crimes. Wait, I said, something nagging at the edge of my memory. Paul was a corporate lawyer, right? What was his background before he came to work for you? Teresa pulled up his file. Started at Morrison & Morris, corporate law firm. Specialized in mergers and acquisitions. Before that. She stopped, her expression shifting. Before that he worked at Meridian Analytics. Same firm you worked at. He was in their legal department for 3 years. The room went completely silent. He knew me, I said, the realization crashing over me like a wave. He worked at Meridian when I was there. He would have known my protocols, my authorization methods, how I structured forensic investigations. He wouldn't have needed to hack my credentials. He already had access. And when you were framed and Meridian collapsed under the scandal, Paul would have been looking for new employment, Andrea said, following the thread. The Volkovs recruited him, knowing he had the exact skills they needed, and a grudge against the system that failed him. Pull his work history at Meridian, I said urgently. Every case he touched, every client he advised. If he's the one who built both frauds, there will be patterns, signatures, and how he structures shell companies and routes money. Vincent and Teresa worked in tandem, pulling records, cross-referencing cases. And there it was, emerging from the data like a photograph developing in chemicals. Paul Hendricks had advised on 17 corporate acquisitions during his time at Meridian. 12 of them had involved subsidiary structures nearly identical to the Whitmore trap. He'd been building this methodology for years, perfecting it, and when the Volkovs offered him enough money, he'd turned that expertise into a weapon. He's not just the leak, I said, staring at the evidence. He's the architect. He built the frame job that destroyed me, and he built the trap that was supposed to destroy you. The Volkovs didn't plan this. Paul did. He's been playing both sides, making himself invaluable to the Volkovs while positioning himself in your organization to sabotage from within. And now he's running because he knows we're close to exposing everything, Teresa said. Andrea's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression went colder than I'd ever seen it. When, he asked. A pause. How many? Another pause. Fall back to secondary positions and wait for my order. He hung up, turned to face us. The Volkovs just moved a strike team into position around this building. 20 men, heavily armed, waiting for the order to breach. Paul must have given them our security protocols because they've disabled half our exterior surveillance. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Can we hold them off? For a while. But this building wasn't designed for a siege. Eventually, they'll find a way in, and when they do, He didn't finish. He didn't need to. So we leave, I said. We take the evidence, get to the regulatory meeting, present everything publicly before they can stop us. They'll be watching every exit. The moment we leave this building, we're exposed. Then we don't use an exit they know about. Andrea looked at me with something between admiration and exasperation. What are you suggesting? Paul knows your security protocols, but does he know the building's original architecture? Service tunnels, maintenance access, anything that existed before you converted this into headquarters. Vincent was already pulling up blueprints. There's an old freight tunnel system connecting to the subway maintenance corridors. It was sealed off years ago, but the entrance is in the basement level. Can we access it? It'll be tight, probably partially collapsed, and we'll have no security coverage once we're inside. But the Volkovs won't know about it. Neither will our own people. If something goes wrong down there, we're on our own. Andrea was quiet for a moment, weighing options, calculating odds. Then he made his decision. Teresa, you stay here with the security team. Make it look like we're preparing to defend the building. Keep them thinking we're trapped. Vincent, you're with me and Amelia. Grab everything we need for the regulatory presentation, physical copies of all evidence. If the Volkovs cut our digital access, we need hard proof. What about Paul? Teresa asked. Put a bounty on him. Every asset we have, every contact in this city. I want him found before the regulatory meeting. He's the key witness, and right now he's the only person who can directly testify about Volkov involvement in the fraud. We moved quickly, gathering laptops, documents, everything I discovered in the past 12 hours. Andrea armed himself with weapons I tried not to look at too closely and made several more calls, repositioning his people, creating diversions. 20 minutes later, we were in the basement, standing in front of a maintenance door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Vincent cut through the padlock with bolt cutters, and the door swung open to reveal darkness and the smell of stale water. Last chance to change your mind, Andrea said, looking at me. I spent 3 years hiding. I'm done with that. I stepped toward the tunnel. Let's go make them pay for what they did. He smiled, that dangerous smile that made my pulse race. 3 years ago, I would have loved having you on my team. 3 years ago, I would have been investigating you. Probably. Good thing we're on the same side now. We entered the tunnel, and Vincent pulled the door closed behind us, sealing us in darkness. Flashlights clicked on, illuminating a corridor of old brick and exposed pipes, water dripping from somewhere above. Stay close, Andrea said. These tunnels connect to the old subway system, which means there are dozens of potential wrong turns. We need to move fast but carefully. We walked in single file, Vincent leading with Andrea behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence like a shield at my back. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, occasional branches splitting off into deeper darkness that we avoided. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when Vincent suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. Voices. Ahead of us. Speaking in Russian. Andrea pulled me back against the wall, his body pressed against mine in the narrow space, one hand covering my mouth to keep me silent. Through the darkness, I could see flashlight beams approaching, sweeping the tunnel ahead of them. The Volkovs had found the tunnels. Or worse, Paul had told them. We were trapped underground with armed men ahead of us and no way to go back without leading them straight to Andrea's headquarters. Andrea's lips moved close to my ear, his voice barely a whisper. There's a maintenance shaft 20 feet back. Can you climb? I nodded against his hand. Vincent, you're going to draw them forward. Make noise. Make them think we're running deeper. Give us 60 seconds, then lose them in the branch tunnels. Boss, that's... Do it. Vincent disappeared into the darkness ahead, and moments later we heard him moving, deliberately loud, boots splashing in puddles. The Russian voices called out, orders shouted, and the flashlight beams shifted to follow the sound. Andrea grabbed my hand and pulled me back the way we'd come, moving in complete darkness now, counting steps. When he stopped, his hands found my waist, lifting me up toward an opening I couldn't see.
Climb. Fast.
I'm right behind you. I found the ladder rungs by touch, rust flaking under my fingers, and climbed into absolute darkness. The shaft was barely wider than my shoulders, vertical, endless. I climbed until my arms burned, until I lost count of the rungs, until I heard Andrea below me and the distant sound of shouting from the tunnel we'd left. Then my hands hit metal. A hatch. "Push it open," Andrea called up softly. I pushed, muscles screaming, and the hatch gave way with a groan that sounded deafening in the enclosed space. Light flooded in, gray morning light, and I pulled myself up into a subway platform. An abandoned one, judging by the layers of dust and graffiti. But I could hear trains in the distance, which meant we were close to active lines. Andrea emerged behind me, breathing hard but controlled. He pulled out his phone, check location. "We're 6 blocks from the federal building where the regulatory meeting is happening. But we've got a problem." Just one. The meeting doesn't start for 8 hours. The Volkovs know we're coming. And somewhere in the city, Paul Hendricks is either running for his life or already dead. He was right. We'd escaped the immediate trap, but we were far from safe. We had evidence, but no way to verify it without digital access. We had a testimony, but no star witness. And we had 8 hours to figure out how to survive long enough to destroy the people who destroyed both our lives. "So, what do we do?" I asked. Andrea looked at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes shift into something else. Determination.
Partnership. Trust. "We hunt," he said.
"We find Paul before the Volkovs do. We force him to testify. And we walk into that regulatory meeting with everything we need to burn their empire to the ground. And if we can't find him, then we go in anyway and hope the evidence is enough." He held out his hand. "Partners?" I took it. Partners. We emerged from the subway into a city that suddenly felt hostile. Every face could be Volkov surveillance. Every car could be carrying armed men. The morning rush hour crowds should have felt like cover, but instead they felt like obstacles, slowing us down while our enemies closed in. Andrea kept us moving, taking turns that seemed random but clearly weren't. He knew the city in ways I never would, knew which alleys connected to which streets, which buildings had multiple exits, where cameras couldn't see. "Where are we going?" I asked, struggling to keep up with his pace. "Somewhere the Volkovs won't think to look. Somewhere Paul might have run if he's smart." He pulled me into a narrow passage between buildings, emerging onto a quieter street. Paul's weakness was always gambling. When he's stressed, he goes to the tables. There are 3 underground casinos in the city that cater to people who need to disappear for a while. You think he'd be that stupid? To go somewhere so predictable? I think he's desperate, and creatures of habit do stupid things when they're desperate. He made a call, spoke in rapid Italian, hung up. "I've got people checking the other 2 locations. We're taking the one in Chinatown." We caught a cab, Andrea paying cash and giving an address 3 blocks from where we actually wanted to go. During the ride, I watched him transform. The Mafia boss persona faded, replaced by something more ordinary. He slouched slightly, softened his expression, became just another tired businessman in an expensive suit. "You need to change your appearance too," he said quietly. "The Volkovs will have distributed your photo by now." He handed me a baseball cap and sunglasses from his jacket pocket. Not much of a disguise, but better than nothing. I tucked my hair up under the cap and put on the glasses, catching my reflection in the window. I looked like every other exhausted professional trying to function on no sleep. The cab dropped us off, and we walked the remaining blocks in silence. The casino was hidden inside what looked like a legitimate import business, through a back room and downstairs that smelled like cigarette smoke and desperation. The guard at the bottom recognized Andrea immediately, stepped aside without a word. We entered a basement space that had been converted into a surprisingly upscale gambling den. Poker tables, roulette wheels, a bar in the corner, maybe 40 people losing money they probably couldn't afford to lose. And there, at a blackjack table, looking like he hadn't slept in days, was Paul Hendricks. Andrea's hand on my arm stopped me from moving forward. "Carefully," he whispered. "He's cornered and scared. Scared people do unpredictable things." We approached slowly, and I watched Paul's shoulders tense as he sensed someone behind him. He turned, saw Andrea, and all the color drained from his face. Boss, I can explain. Stand up, Andrea said quietly. Walk with us to the back room. Don't make a scene. You know what happens if you make me cause a scene in a neutral establishment. Paul stood on shaking legs, chips forgotten on the table. We moved to a private room in the back, soundproofed and windowless, the kind of place where business got conducted without interruption. The moment the door closed, Paul started talking, words tumbling out desperately. They have my sister. The Volkovs, they grabbed her this morning, said they'd kill her if I didn't give them everything. I didn't have a choice. You have to understand, I didn't want to. How long have you been working for them? I interrupted, keeping my voice level despite the rage burning in my chest. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw recognition dawn. Amelia Mercer, he said. God, I didn't think you'd still be in the city. I thought you'd have left after. After you framed me? After you destroyed my entire life. The words came out colder than I intended. How long, Paul? He slumped into a chair. 5 years. They approached me at Meridian, said they needed someone who understood corporate law and financial systems. The money was too good to refuse. And at first it was just consulting, helping them structure deals to avoid scrutiny. But then they wanted more. They wanted you to frame someone, Andrea said. Someone whose credentials you had access to. You were brilliant, Paul said, looking at me with something like regret. Too brilliant. You would have caught the fraud they were running if they hadn't stopped you. So they told me to make it look like you were the one doing it. I'm sorry, I really am, but they would have killed me if I refused. And the Whitmore deal? I asked. Same methodology, bigger scale. I spent 3 years perfecting the model. Shell companies that look legitimate until you dig deep enough. Assets that evaporate post-acquisition. Regulatory approvals that can be controlled. It should have worked. Would have worked if you hadn't recognized Helix dynamics. Because you got lazy, I said. You reused structures instead of building new ones. You left patterns that connected back to what you did to me. I had 6 weeks to build the entire trap. The Volkovs wanted to move fast, take advantage of market conditions. I did the best I could. Andrea pulled up a chair, sat down facing Paul. His voice remained quiet, controlled, but I could hear the steel underneath. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to testify at the regulatory meeting. You're going to explain exactly how the Volkov fraud works, who ordered it, who benefits from it. You're going to provide evidence that clears Amelia's name and implicates everyone involved in both schemes. They'll kill me. They'll kill my sister. Your sister is already dead, Andrea said flatly. The moment you ran, the Volkovs eliminated their leverage. That's how they work. You know this. Paul's face crumpled.
No.
No, they said if I cooperated. They lied. They always lie. Andrea leaned forward. But I'm offering you something they can't. Protection. Witness relocation. A chance to survive this. All you have to do is tell the truth. And if I refuse? The temperature in the room dropped. Then I leave you here, make a phone call, and let the Volkovs know exactly where to find you. They'll make it slow, Paul. Painful. Because you failed them, and they don't tolerate failure. I watched Paul process his options, saw the exact moment he realized he had none. He'd burned bridges in every direction, and the only way forward was through the fire. What do you need me to do? He asked finally, voice hollow. Start by giving us access to your files. Everything you built for the Volkovs. Every shell company. Every fake asset. Every piece of the fraud. We need ironclad proof that holds up under federal scrutiny. Paul pulled out a laptop from his bag with shaking hands. It's all encrypted. They'll know the moment I access it. They track every login. Let them know, Andrea said. Let them see you're cooperating with me. It'll force them to make mistakes. Paul logged in, and for the next 2 hours we downloaded everything. Corporate structures, financial flows, communications with Volkov leadership, names of corrupted officials. It was more comprehensive than anything I'd found, a complete roadmap of criminal enterprise spanning years. And buried in those files, I found it, the original code that had been used to frame me. My authorization protocols, my digital signature, everything that had been stolen and weaponized. Along with communications between Paul and Volkov operatives detailing exactly how they planned to destroy my career and why. They wanted to eliminate you before you could analyze a different deal they were planning, Paul said quietly, reading over my shoulder. One worth $3 billion. You would have caught it immediately if they hadn't stopped you first. So they made you the criminal instead of the investigator. I stared at the evidence, years of anger and grief crystallizing into something sharp and purposeful. This was it. Everything I needed to clear my name, to prove I'd been set up, to reclaim the life they'd stolen. Andrea's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression shifted to concern. When? A pause. How many casualties? Another pause. Fall back to the secondary location. I'll be there soon. He hung up, looked at me and Paul. The Volkovs just hit my headquarters. Full assault, breached the building 20 minutes ago. Teresa got most people out, but we lost 4 in the fighting. The building is compromised, and they're tearing it apart looking for evidence. My stomach dropped. The files we left there. Already wiped remotely. But they'll know what we were working on from the physical documents, the notes, everything we couldn't digitize in time. He stood. We need to move. The regulatory meeting starts in 4 hours. We need to get Paul and this evidence to the federal building before the Volkovs figure out where we are. They'll be watching the federal building, I said. Every entrance, every approach. How do we get in without being intercepted? We don't go to the building. We bring the meeting to us. I stared at him. You can't be serious. I know 3 of the 5 committee members personally. Not because they're corrupt, but because they're genuinely trying to clean up financial crime in this city. If we can get them to a secure location with the evidence, they can conduct an emergency review and shut down the Whitmore deal before it closes. And the 2 Volkov plants on the committee? We exclude them. Claim the meeting location changed due to security threats, which isn't even a lie. By the time they realize what happened, the decision will be made and documented. It was bold, reckless even, but it might work. Paul spoke up, voice shaking. There's something else you should know. The Volkovs have a contingency plan. If the deal falls through, if they think they're about to be exposed, they've got authorization to eliminate everyone involved. A cleanup operation. That includes committee members, witnesses, anyone who can testify against them. How do you know this? Because I helped plan it. Identified targets, established timelines, created cover stories for the assassinations. He looked sick. It was supposed to be theoretical, a worst-case scenario. But if you go public with this evidence, they'll activate the plan. A lot of people will die. The room fell silent. So we're trapped, I said quietly. If we don't expose them, Andrea loses everything and I stay destroyed. If we do expose them, they start killing people to protect themselves. Unless we move faster than they can react, Andrea said. We get the committee together, present evidence, force an immediate federal investigation with full protective custody for all witnesses. Once federal authorities are involved, the Volkovs can't make obvious moves without bringing down scrutiny. They can't survive. That's a lot of assumptions, Paul said. You have a better idea? Silence. Then we move.
Now.
We left through a back exit, emerging into an alley that smelled like garbage and rain. Andrea made calls as we walked, speaking in code, arranging meetings, pulling strings I didn't fully understand. A car picked us up, unmarked and driven by someone who didn't ask questions. We drove to a location in the industrial district, a warehouse that had been converted into what looked like a corporate conference space. Neutral territory, apparently, used for business that couldn't happen in official venues. Committee members started arriving within the hour. First came Dr. Sarah Morris, a financial crimes expert who'd spent 20 years working to clean up Wall Street corruption. Then James Morrison, a former federal prosecutor who'd made his reputation taking down organized crime families. Finally, Patricia Reeves, the committee chair, a woman in her 60s who radiated authority and no-nonsense competence. They were curious, concerned, and clearly unhappy about the irregular meeting conditions. But they stayed. And they listened. For 3 hours, Paul testified. He walked them through every detail of the Volkov fraud, showed them the evidence, explained how the Whitmore deal was designed to destroy Andrea's organization while enriching the Volkovs. He confessed to his role in framing me, provided the digital evidence that proved my innocence, named names and detailed crimes spanning years. I watched the committee members' faces as Paul spoke, saw skepticism shift to shock, shock harden into grim determination. This was bigger than one acquisition, bigger than two criminal enterprises fighting for territory. This was a systematic corruption of the financial oversight system that was supposed to protect everyone. Dr. Morris was the first to speak when Paul finished, her voice tight, with controlled anger. The documentation you've provided will require verification, but if even half of this is accurate, we're looking at the largest coordinated financial fraud case in a decade. It's all accurate, I said, speaking up for the first time. I've spent the last 18 hours tracing every thread. The shell companies, the fake assets, the corrupted approvals. I can walk you through every piece of evidence and show you how it connects. Patricia Reeves studied me with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Amelia Mercer. I remember your case. You were prosecuted for fraud 3 years ago, though charges were mysteriously dropped. Now you're working with Andrea Leonardo, whose organization operates outside legal boundaries. Forgive me if I'm skeptical about your credibility as a witness. I was framed by the same people who built this trap, I said, meeting her gaze directly. The evidence Paul just provided proves that. My supposed crime and the Whitmore fraud were designed by the same person using the same methodology. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to verify the evidence independently. James Morrison was already on his phone, making calls, pulling strings of his own. I'm requesting immediate federal involvement. Financial Crimes Division, Organized Crime Task Force, full forensic audit team. This goes beyond our committee's jurisdiction. The Whitmore acquisition closes in less than 3 hours, Andrea reminded them. If federal involvement takes longer than that, the Volkovs walk away with $70 billion and we lose our window to stop them. Then we issue an emergency injunction, Dr. Morris said. Freeze the deal pending investigation. It'll buy us time. It'll also tell the Volkovs we're onto them, Paul said, his voice shaking. They'll activate the contingency plan.
People will die.
What contingency plan? Patricia demanded. Paul explained, and I watched the committee members process the reality of what they were facing. This wasn't just financial crime. This was organized violence hidden behind corporate paperwork. We need federal protection for everyone in this room, Morrison said. Witnesses, committee members, anyone connected to this investigation. And we need it now. He made more calls, and I felt the weight of law enforcement machinery starting to move. Slow at first, bureaucratic, but gathering momentum. Within 30 minutes, federal agents were on their way. Within an hour, we had armed guards outside the warehouse and a protective detail being assembled for every witness. But 3 hours felt like an eternity when people were trying to kill you. Andrea pulled me aside while the committee worked through legal procedures and evidence verification. You did it, he said quietly. Everything you needed to clear your name, it's right there. Federal investigators will verify Paul's testimony, trace the evidence back to the Volkovs, officially exonerate you. You can have your life back. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have gotten here without your resources, your protection. This is a shared victory. Is it? He studied my face, and I saw something complicated in his expression. Because once federal protection kicks in, you don't need me anymore. You can walk away from this world, go back to being a legitimate financial analyst. Find a firm that will hire you now that your name is cleared. Build the career you should have had 3 years ago. The future he was describing should have sounded perfect. It was everything I'd wanted, everything I'd been fighting for. But standing there, looking at this dangerous man who'd somehow become a partner, a protector, something more complicated than either of those words captured, I realized something terrifying.
I didn't want to walk away.
What if I don't want my old life back? I said slowly. What if 3 years of being invisible taught me that the person I was before, she was good at her job, but she was also naive.
Trusting.
She believed the system would protect her, if she just followed the rules. And the system failed her completely. So, what do you want? I want to be someone the system can't fail again. Someone who understands how power actually works in the city, who has the skills to fight corruption but isn't trapped by the rules that protect the corrupt. I took a breath, committing to words that would change everything. I want to keep working with you. Not as temporary partners, but as a permanent arrangement. You need someone who can navigate financial systems, trace money, identify threats before they materialize. I need protection and resources, and a purpose that matters. He was quiet for a long moment, and I couldn't read his expression. You understand what you're asking for, he said finally. Working for me, with me, means operating in spaces where the law doesn't reach. It means making choices that legitimate analysts never have to make. It means danger, constantly, because people like the Volkovs will always be trying to destroy what I've built. I understand. It also means you can't go back. Once you're part of my world, you're part of it permanently. There's no returning to normalcy, no pretending you're just a financial consultant who occasionally advises questionable clients. You'll be complicit in everything I do, everything my organization is. I spent 3 years being nobody. I'd rather be somebody dangerous than nobody safe. Something shifted in his expression then, the calculation giving way to something warmer. He reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture so unexpectedly gentle that my breath caught. You were always dangerous, he said quietly. You just didn't know it yet. That brilliant mind, that refusal to break, that courage that walks into situations that should terrify you. The Volkovs saw it, tried to destroy you before you could become a real threat. But you survived. And now you're offering to aim all that intelligence and determination at everyone who operates like they do. Is that a yes? It's a warning. Because if you do this, if you choose this path, I'll protect you with everything I have. But I'll also use you, rely on you, put you in situations where your skills are needed even when it's dangerous. I won't treat you like someone who needs to be kept safe. I'll treat you like the weapon you've proven yourself to be.
Good.
I don't want to be protected from the fight. I want to be in it. He smiled then, that dangerous smile that made something in my chest tighten. Then welcome to the war. Partners. Permanently. He offered his hand, and this time when I took it, the handshake felt like a contract signed in something more binding than ink. Patricia's voice cut through the moment. We have a problem. We turned back to the group, where James Morrison looked grim. The Federal Protection Detail hit traffic. They're 20 minutes out. But we just got word that a Volkov strike team was spotted 6 blocks from here, moving this direction. Someone leaked our location. Everyone looked at Paul. It wasn't me, he protested, holding up his phone. I haven't contacted anyone. I've been here the whole time under your supervision. Then how did they find us? Dr. Morris demanded. Andrea was already moving, checking his own phone, making calls. They're tracking something. Either a device or a person. Everyone phones out now. We all pulled out our phones, and Andrea's security expert, who'd been standing guard outside, came in with a scanner. He swept each phone, found nothing. Then he moved to Paul's laptop. The scanner went crazy. Tracking software embedded in the operating system, the security expert said. Military grade. Broadcast location every 30 seconds. The moment he logged in to show you the evidence, it activated. Paul went pale. I didn't know. They must have installed it when they gave me the laptop. I thought I was being careful. Doesn't matter now, Andrea said. They know where we are. They're moving to eliminate witnesses before federal protection arrives, and we have maybe 10 minutes before they breach this location. We have to evacuate, Morrison said. Get everyone out, scatter, meet up with federal agents separately. No, I said, an idea forming with crystalline clarity. If we scatter, they pick us off individually. They have more resources, more people. We'll never all make it to safety. So, what do you suggest? Patricia demanded. We use their assault against them. We know they're coming, which means we have time to prepare. We document everything. Set up cameras, record the attack. Make sure when federal agents arrive they find irrefutable evidence of Volkov operatives attempting to murder federal committee members and protected witnesses. You want to use us as bait, Dr. Morris said. I want to turn their worst-case scenario into ours. They're about to commit multiple attempted murders against federal officials. That brings down scrutiny. They absolutely cannot survive. Even their corrupted connections can't protect them from that level of exposure. Andrea was already on his phone, issuing orders. I'm calling in every person I have in range. If the Volkovs want to fight, we'll give them one. But Amelia's right. We document everything. Make it impossible for them to deny. The next 8 minutes were controlled chaos. Andrea's people arrived, armed and professional, setting up defensive positions. Morrison called in the federal agents, gave them our exact location and the nature of the threat, ensured they understood this was now an active hostage situation requiring immediate tactical response. And I set up every camera, every recording device we had, positioned to capture every angle of the warehouse floor. Committee members in the back room, Andrea ordered. Paul with them. If shooting starts, you stay down and you stay hidden until federal agents secure the building. Amelia, you should go with them. Not a chance. You need someone monitoring the recordings, making sure we capture everything.
I'm staying.
He looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The security expert at the door gave a signal. Company approaching. We took positions. Andrea's people were calm, professional, clearly experienced in situations like this. I crouched behind a concrete support pillar with a laptop showing feeds from all the cameras, my heart hammering but my hands steady. The warehouse doors exploded inward. 12 men entered, heavily armed, moving with military precision. They wore no identifying marks, no uniforms, but their formation and equipment screamed professional soldiers, not street thugs. Federal committee members. The lead man called out in accented English. Come out peacefully, and you won't be harmed. We're here for Paul Hendricks and the stolen evidence. Give them to us, and everyone else walks away. Lying through their teeth, Andrea murmured beside me. They're here to kill everyone. You can't leave witnesses. He was right. I could see it in how they moved, how they covered angles, how they had someone watching the back exits. This wasn't extraction. This was execution. Federal agents are 3 minutes out, I whispered. All we have to do is stall. Andrea stood up, hands visible and empty, the picture of reasonable cooperation. You're making a mistake. This location is under federal surveillance. Everything you do here is being recorded and transmitted directly to law enforcement. The lead operative smiled.
Good.
Then they'll see that you are harboring a fugitive and interfering with a legitimate corporate security operation. Mr. Hendricks stole proprietary information. We're here to recover it. By killing federal committee members? Accidents happen in tense standoffs. Tragic, really, when civilians get caught in crossfire. They were positioning now, spreading out, preparing to overwhelm through superior numbers and firepower. 3 minutes felt like hours. Then Patricia Reeves did something incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. She walked out of the back room, hands raised, voice calm, and carrying authority that made even armed operatives hesitate. I'm Patricia Reeves, chair of the Financial Oversight Committee. Whatever you've been told, whatever you think you're authorized to do, understand this clearly. The moment you entered this building with weapons drawn, you committed multiple federal crimes. Assault on federal officials, attempted witness intimidation, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Every second you remain here compounds your legal exposure. Get back inside, old woman, the lead operative said. This doesn't concern you. It absolutely concerns me. Paul Hendricks is under federal protection as a material witness. The evidence he's provided implicates your employers in systematic fraud spanning multiple jurisdictions. You cannot stop this investigation with violence. You can only make it worse for everyone involved.
She was buying time.
Magnificent, brave, absolutely insane time buying.
And it was working.
The operatives hesitated, exchanged glances, clearly not expecting federal officials to walk directly into a potential firefight. Then I heard it. Sirens. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast. The lead operative heard them too. His expression shifted from confident to calculating to desperate in seconds. Everyone down, Andrea shouted. The operative raised his weapon, and federal agents crashed through every entrance simultaneously. What happened next was chaos compressed into seconds. Commands shouted in multiple languages, weapons drawn, tactical teams moving with precise efficiency. Andrea's people wisely dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The Volkov operatives tried to resist, then thought better of it as they were outnumbered 3-1. Within 2 minutes, the situation was contained. 12 Volkov operatives in custody, multiple weapons seized, and every second of their assault captured on the cameras I'd positioned. A federal agent approached Patricia, checked that she was unharmed, then turned to survey the scene with sharp professional eyes. "Someone want to explain what the hell is happening here?" Patricia did, with remarkable composure for someone who just faced down armed operatives. She outlined the fraud, the evidence, Paul's testimony, the attempted attack. James Morrison backed her up with legal specifics, while Dr. Morris provided the financial crime context. And I uploaded every recording to federal servers, ensuring nothing could be deleted or lost. By the time more federal agents arrived, we had an airtight case. Evidence of fraud, testimony from a cooperating witness, documentation of assassination attempts, and a dozen suspects in custody who would eventually cooperate to save themselves from longer sentences. The Whitmore acquisition was frozen immediately. Federal investigators descended on the Volkov organization like locusts, tearing apart corporate structures, freezing assets, issuing warrants for everyone connected to the fraud. It was over. Not completely, not yet. Legal proceedings would take months, maybe years. But the immediate danger had passed. The Volkovs couldn't kill their way out of this level of federal scrutiny. An agent approached me, introduced himself as Special Agent Morris from the Financial Crimes Division. "Ms. Mercer, we're going to need your full statement about what happened 3 years ago. Based on Paul Hendricks' testimony and the evidence you've compiled, the Justice Department is prepared to issue an official exoneration clearing you of all fraud charges." The words should have brought relief.
Joy.
Vindication. Instead, I just felt exhausted. "How long until the paperwork is complete?" I asked. "A few days, maybe a week. We'll need to verify everything, make it official. But you're clear, Ms. Mercer. Your reputation will be restored, your credentials reinstated. You'll be able to return to financial analysis work anywhere you want." Anywhere I want. I looked across the warehouse to where Andrea stood talking with federal agents, somehow managing to make multiple attempted murder charges against his organization seem like a minor misunderstanding. He caught my eye, and something passed between us. Understanding. Recognition. A promise made and accepted. "Thank you," I told Agent Morris. "I'll provide whatever statements you need. But just so you know, I already have employment lined up." "Oh, where?" I smiled. "Private consulting. Very specialized clientele." He looked skeptical, but didn't push. Federal agents had bigger concerns than my future career plans. The committee members were being escorted to secure locations, given protection details until the investigation concluded. Paul was taken into federal custody, witness protection already being arranged. The Volkov operatives were being processed for charges that would ensure most of them spent decades in prison. And I stood in the middle of a warehouse that smelled like concrete and gunpowder, watching my old life officially end and my new one take shape in its place. Andrea finished with the agents and walked over, somehow looking completely calm despite the insanity of the last hour. "So," he said, "still interested in that permanent partnership? After all this?" "Absolutely." I gestured at the controlled chaos around us. "Though I'm hoping not every day involves federal raids and armed standoffs. Only the interesting days." "How often are days interesting?" "More often than you'd think." I laughed, the sound slightly hysterical but genuine. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the federal investigation to clear you officially. Shouldn't take long with the evidence we've provided. Then we start rebuilding. The Volkovs are going to be occupied with legal defenses for years, which creates opportunities. Territory they can't hold, operations they have to abandon, people will be looking for new leadership. And you're planning to fill that vacuum. Someone has to. Might as well be someone who prevents the next Volkov family from emerging." He paused. But that's business. More immediately, you need rest, food, probably medical attention given that we've both been running on adrenaline and spite for 18 hours. He wasn't wrong. Now that the immediate danger had passed, exhaustion was crashing over me like a wave. Where do we go? I asked. Your headquarters is compromised. My apartment is probably under surveillance. The federal agents want us available for statements. I have places the federal government doesn't know about. Safe houses, backup locations, spaces where we can breathe for a minute before dealing with the aftermath. He offered his hand. Trust me? I took it without hesitation. Partners trust each other. That's how this works, right? That's exactly how this works. We left through a side exit into a city that looked exactly the same as it had 18 hours ago, but felt completely different. I was different. Not the naive analyst who'd believed the system would protect her. Not the invisible waitress hiding from her past. Someone new, forged in the pressure of the last day, sharp and dangerous and finally alive again. Hey, I said as we walked. Thank you. For seeing me when I was trying to be invisible. For believing me when you had no reason to. For giving me a chance to fight back. Andrea stopped, turned to face me fully. You saved my empire. Exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed everything I've built. I should be thanking you. So we're even. We're partners. That's better than even. The sun was setting over the city, painting everything in orange and gold. In the distance, I could hear sirens, the city's constant background rhythm. But for the first time in 3 years, they didn't sound threatening. They sounded like justice catching up, like systems finally working the way they were supposed to. We had won. Not completely, not perfectly. But we had survived, exposed the truth, and built something new from the wreckage of what we'd both lost. And tomorrow, we'd start building something even better. The federal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours, the evidence Paul provided, combined with what I compiled and the attempted assassination captured on camera, built a case so airtight that even the Volkovs' corrupted connections couldn't slow it down. Asset freezes cascaded through their organization. Warrants were issued. Associates started cooperating to save themselves. The empire they'd spent decades building crumbled in days. And through it all, Andrea and I worked from a safe house in a part of the city I'd never known existed, coordinating with federal agents, providing analysis, watching our enemies collapse under the weight of their own crimes. On the third day, Agent Morris called with news. It's official. The Justice Department has issued a full exoneration for Amelia Mercer. All fraud charges formally dismissed, your professional credentials restored, and a public statement acknowledging you were the victim of a coordinated frame job. You're clear, Ms. Mercer. Completely clear. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired and relieved, and ready to move forward.
Thank you, I said.
What about the Volkovs? 43 arrests so far, including Viktor Volkov himself. He's facing federal charges that carry mandatory minimums totaling 160 years. He'll die in prison. Most of his lieutenants are cooperating, giving us information on operations we didn't even know existed. It's the biggest organized crime takedown in 20 years. After he hung up, I sat in silence for a moment, processing. 3 years of being destroyed, being invisible, being broken. And now, vindication. My name cleared, my reputation restored, justice served. Andrea found me on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Heard the news, he said, handing me a glass of wine. Congratulations. You got everything you wanted. Almost everything. What's missing? I turned to face him. I want to see them. Viktor Volkov, his associates, everyone who decided my life was worth destroying for their profit. I want to look them in the eyes and make sure they know exactly who beat them. He smiled that dangerous smile. The preliminary hearing is tomorrow. Federal courthouse, high security, press everywhere. Viktor will be there for arraignment. If you want to attend, I can arrange it. Will you come with me? Partners, remember? I'm not letting you face them alone. The next morning, we dressed carefully. Me in a suit that made me look like the financial analyst I used to be, professional and competent and unbreakable. Andrea in dark tailored perfection that somehow made him look both legitimate and dangerous. The federal courthouse was chaos. Press everywhere, cameras, reporters shouting questions. Federal agents maintaining perimeter security. And inside, a courtroom packed with observers, defendants, lawyers building cases that would take years to fully prosecute. Viktor Volkov sat at the defense table, flanked by expensive attorneys who already looked defeated. He was older than I expected, maybe 60, with cold eyes that had watched empires rise and fall. He barely glanced at the gallery as we entered, his attention focused on legal documents like this was just another business problem to solve. But when I sat down in the front row, directly in his line of sight, he looked up and froze. Recognition dawned slowly. The waitress from that night at Celestine. The analyst he'd destroyed 3 years ago. The woman who'd torn apart his $70 billion trap and brought his entire empire crashing down. I smiled at him. Not friendly. Not forgiving. The smile of someone who'd survived everything he'd thrown at her and come back stronger. His composure cracked just for a second. Rage flashed across his face, followed by something that might have been fear. The judge entered. Proceedings began. The charges were read, a litany of crimes spanning years. Fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, attempted murder, witness intimidation, corruption of federal officials. Each charge carried years of prison time. Combined, they guaranteed Viktor would never see freedom again. His attorneys tried to argue for bail, claiming he wasn't a flight risk, that he had deep community ties, that the charges were exaggerated. The prosecutor destroyed those arguments with evidence, witness statements, financial records showing offshore accounts, and escape plans already in motion. Bail denied. Remanded to federal custody pending trial. As marshals moved to take him away, Viktor looked directly at me. His mouth moved, forming words I could just barely hear over the courtroom noise. "You'll regret this." I stood up, made sure he could hear me clearly. "I already regretted 3 years of my life because of what you did. Now you get to spend the rest of yours regretting that you didn't kill me when you had the chance." Andrea's hand touched my back, gentle support as Viktor was led away in handcuffs, his empire destroyed, his freedom gone, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions about the case, about my role in exposing the fraud, about my exoneration. Agent Morris had warned me this would happen, that my story was too compelling for the press to ignore. I gave a brief statement, thanked the federal investigators, expressed relief that justice was being served, and made it clear that I looked forward to rebuilding my career and moving forward. Professional, composed, giving them nothing controversial to sensationalize. Then Andrea and I walked away, leaving the circus behind, stepping into a car that drove us back to the safe house. "How do you feel?" he asked as the courthouse disappeared behind us. "Lighter. Like I've been carrying weight for 3 years and finally put it down." I looked at him. "Thank you. For all of it. For believing me, protecting me, giving me the chance to fight back. You did the fighting. I just provided resources. You provided more than that. You provided partnership when I'd forgotten what that felt like. You saw who I really was when I was trying to be invisible. That matters more than resources." Something shifted in his expression, the calculation giving way to something warmer and more complicated. "Amelia," he said quietly, "you understand that what we're building, this partnership, it's going to be complicated. Dangerous. There will be moments when you question the choices we make, when the line between justice and revenge gets blurred, when operating outside the law feels less like freedom and more like compromise. I understand. And I'm choosing it anyway." I turned to face him fully. 3 years ago, I believed the system would protect people who did the right thing. It didn't. It failed me completely. So now I'm choosing to work with someone who understands that real justice sometimes requires operating in spaces the law can't reach. As long as you're sure. I'm sure. The car stopped at the safe house. We went inside, and for the first time in days, there was no immediate crisis, no urgent threat, no deadline counting down. Just quiet space to breathe and process everything that had happened. Andrea opened a bottle of expensive scotch, poured 2 glasses, handed me one. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. To partnerships that survive impossible odds, I countered. We drank, and the scotch burned in the best way, warmth spreading through exhaustion. So, what happens now? I asked. Practically speaking, the federal investigation will take months. The Volkovs are destroyed, but their territory is empty. You mentioned opportunities. Several. Their operations left gaps that need filling. Legitimate businesses they controlled that need new leadership. Financial networks that need restructuring to remove criminal elements. He set down his glass. It's a chance to rebuild parts of this city's infrastructure in ways that actually benefit people instead of just extracting wealth. That sounds almost noble. Don't mistake pragmatism for nobility. I'm doing this because a stable, functional city is better for business than constant chaos. But if some good comes from it, I'm not opposed. I laughed. Honest pragmatism. I can work with that. He moved closer, and suddenly the space between us felt charged with electricity that had nothing to do with business partnerships. Amelia, I need to say something, and I need you to listen carefully. Okay. What we've built these past few days, this partnership, it works because we're both bringing skills and resources the other needs. That's good foundation. Professional, strategic, sustainable.
He paused.
But somewhere in the chaos and danger and fighting for our lives, it became more than that. At least for me. My heart was suddenly hammering. More than that how? I've spent 15 years building an organization where trust is tactical and relationships are strategic. Where caring about someone makes you vulnerable and vulnerability gets you killed. I've been good at maintaining that distance, at keeping everyone at arm's length. He reached up, tucked hair behind my ear in that gesture that made my breath catch. And then you walked into my restaurant, spotted a $70 billion trap in seconds, and looked at me like I was a puzzle worth solving instead of a threat worth avoiding. You've been fearless and brilliant and absolutely infuriating, and somewhere in all that, you became someone I don't want at arm's length. Andrea, I started, not sure what I was going to say. You don't have to respond. I know this complicates everything. I know mixing professional partnership with personal feelings is generally a terrible idea. But I've never been good at lying, especially not to people who matter, and you matter more than I expected anyone to matter. I set down my glass, moved closer until we were sharing space, until I could see gold flecks in those dark eyes. You want to know something terrifying? I said quietly. 3 days ago, I was invisible. Safe and suffocating and slowly dying inside. Then you grabbed my wrist and pulled me into your world, and suddenly I was alive again, challenged and valued, and seen in ways I'd forgotten were possible. And yes, somewhere in fighting for our lives and dismantling conspiracies and trusting each other with everything, you became more than a strategic partner. Amelia. I kissed him before he could finish, before either of us could overthink it, before the moment passed. His arms came around me immediately, pulling me closer, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate, and 3 days of tension finally finding release. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. This is still a terrible idea, he said. Probably the worst. We should be professional. Keep clear boundaries. Absolutely should. But I'm not going to. Good. Neither am I. He laughed, the sound low and genuine, and pulled me back in for another kiss that made my knees weak and my brain stop caring about professional boundaries or strategic complications. We eventually made it to the couch, tangled together, talking between kisses about futures and plans and all the ways we'd rebuild what the Volkovs had tried to destroy. Not just businesses and reputations, but lives. Purposes. The belief that fighting for justice mattered even when the system failed. Tell me something, I said, head resting on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. When did you know you wanted this to be more than professional? He was quiet for a moment, fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. The elevator. When you asked if I was taking a lot on faith by trusting you, and I told you I was good at reading people. You looked at me like you were reading me right back, like you could see through the reputation and the danger to something worth understanding. No one's looked at me like that in years. Maybe ever. I was terrified in that elevator. I know. But you were also curious. Engaged.
Alive.
I've spent years around people who either fear me or want something from me. You were the first person in forever who seemed interested in figuring out who I actually was. And who are you actually? Still figuring that out. But I like who I am when I'm with you. Someone who builds instead of just controls. Someone who sees opportunities for good instead of just profit. Someone who remembers what it's like to feel something real. I kissed him again, slower this time, taking the time to memorize this moment. The weight of his arms around me, the smell of cedar and smoke, the feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed. Agent Morris, with an update. The Volkov prosecution was moving forward rapidly, cooperation from lower-level operatives providing evidence that would seal convictions for everyone involved. My official exoneration would be published in all major financial publications within 48 hours, along with a detailed explanation of how I'd been framed and my crucial role in exposing the conspiracy. Your reputation is about to be better than it ever was, Andrea said, reading over my shoulder. Financial analyst who survived frame job, exposed massive fraud, cooperated with federal investigation to bring down organized crime empire. You'll have job offers from every major firm. Good thing I already accepted the position I want. Working for a man the federal government barely tolerates. Working with a partner who sees my value and gives me challenges worth solving. I turned to face him, though we should probably discuss actual terms. Salary, responsibilities, clear boundaries between professional and personal. Practical even in the afterglow. This is why you're perfect for this work. We spent the next hour hammering out details. I'd be his chief financial strategist, analyzing opportunities, identifying threats, restructuring legitimate businesses he controlled to maximize both profit and positive community impact. Generous salary, full access to resources, equal voice in strategic decisions. A real partnership, formalized and clear. One more thing, Andrea said as we finished. The safe house where we've been staying. It's yours if you want it. Secure, comfortable, completely off the books. Better than going back to your old apartment, which is definitely still compromised. You're offering me a place to live? I'm offering you a secure location where you can work without worrying about retaliation from remaining Volkov associates or anyone else who might target you. There are 3 other safe houses I use regularly. This one makes sense for you. And if I wanted to stay somewhere you use regularly? He smiled. Then we'd figure that out too. No pressure either way. But you should have space that's yours, where you feel safe. I thought about my old apartment, tiny and generic, the place I'd hidden for 3 years. Then thought about the space, comfortable and secure, a place where I could actually build a life instead of just surviving. I'll take it. The safe house, the job, the partnership. All of it. No regrets. Ask me in a year. But right now, no regrets at all. 6 months later, I stood in a conference room that overlooked the city, presenting financial analysis to a board of directors who had no idea they were taking advice from a woman who'd spent 3 years serving them drinks. The company was one Andrea had acquired from the collapsed Volkov empire, a legitimate tech firm that had been bled dry by criminal management. We'd spent months restructuring, removing corrupt elements, reinvesting in actual innovation. Now it was profitable, growing, creating jobs instead of destroying them. The Q3 projections look strong, I concluded, closing my presentation. Revenue up 37%, operating costs down 18%, and employee retention at 92%. The restructuring worked. The board members nodded, asked a few questions I answered easily, then approved the strategic plan I'd recommended. Professional, smooth, exactly what legitimate business should look like. After they left, Andrea entered from the adjoining office where he'd been listening. You made that look easy, he said. It is easy when you're working with a company that's actually functional instead of a criminal front. I gathered my materials. 3 more acquisitions closing this quarter. All of them former Volkov operations we're converting to legitimate businesses. We're actually making a difference. We're making money. The difference is a side benefit. Pragmatist. Always. We left together, and I marveled at how normal this had become. Working alongside Andrea, rebuilding parts of the city's economic infrastructure, operating in that gray space between completely legal and completely criminal. The federal government watched us carefully, but we were meticulous about staying on the right side of major laws.
No fraude, no violence, no obvious crimes.
Just aggressive business practices and strategic advantage.
My phone rang.
Teresa with news about another opportunity, a shipping company that needed financial restructuring. I took notes, asked questions, scheduled meetings. This was my life now. Busy, challenging, purposeful. Dinner tonight? Andrea asked as we reached his car.
Can't.
I'm meeting with Dr. Morris from the Oversight Committee. She wants to consult on a case. Thinks there might be fraud in a corporate merger she's reviewing. You're doing legitimate consulting now? Why not? I'm good at it. I'm officially exonerated, and it keeps me current on regulatory practices. I kissed him quickly. Besides, having federal committee members who trust my analysis is good for both of us. Strategic even in your personal consulting. I've trained you well. You didn't train me. You gave me space to remember who I already was. He pulled me back for a longer kiss, the kind that made me consider canceling my meeting. But professionalism won out.
Barely.
I met Dr. Morris at a coffee shop, reviewed the case she brought, and within an hour identified 3 red flags that suggested the merger was hiding significant debt. She thanked me, promised to dig deeper, and mentioned she'd been recommending me to other committee members who needed financial analysis. You've built quite a reputation, she said. The analyst who exposed the Volkov conspiracy and helped bring down one of the largest organized crime operations in decades. People trust you. I just do the work. Follow the numbers. Identify the truth. It's more than that. You have integrity. In this business, that's rare and valuable. After she left, I sat for a while, processing. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible. Now I had federal officials consulting me, a thriving career, a partnership that fulfilled me professionally and personally. I'd rebuilt everything the Volkovs destroyed and built something better in its place. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrea. Paul's sentencing, hearing tomorrow. Thought you'd want to know.
Paul.
The architect of both frauds, the man who'd framed me and nearly destroyed Andrea's empire. He'd cooperated extensively with federal investigators, provided testimony that sealed convictions for dozens of Volkov associates. In exchange, he'd received a reduced sentence. Tomorrow he'd learn exactly how reduced. I texted back. I'll be there. The sentencing hearing was quieter than Victor's arraignment had been. Less press, fewer observers. Just Paul, his attorney, federal prosecutors, and a judge who'd reviewed months of testimony and cooperation. The prosecutor spoke first, acknowledging Paul's extensive cooperation while emphasizing the severity of his crimes. Fraud, conspiracy, frame job that destroyed an innocent woman's career. The original charges carried 40 years. With cooperation, they were recommending 12. Paul's attorney argued for less, citing his remorse, his sister's death at Volkov hands, the threats he'd lived under, painting him as much victim as perpetrator. Then the judge asked if anyone wanted to provide impact statements before sentencing. I stood up. The judge recognized me, gestured for me to approach. I walked to the front of the courtroom, very aware of Paul watching me with hollow eyes. Your Honor, I'm Amelia Mercer. Mr. Hendricks framed me for fraud 3 years ago, destroyed my career, my reputation, my life. I spent 3 years hiding, invisible, barely surviving while the people who'd used me walked free. The crime he committed against me was calculated, deliberate, and devastating. Paul wouldn't meet my eyes. But, I continued, Mr. Hendricks also provided the evidence that eventually exonerated me and brought down the organization that ordered my destruction. His cooperation, however motivated by self-preservation, helped achieve justice for dozens of victims beyond just me. So while I can never forgive what he did, I can acknowledge that he ultimately helped make things right. The judge nodded, made notes. That said, 12 years feels appropriate. Long enough to reflect true accountability for serious crimes, short enough to recognize genuine cooperation. I trust your wisdom in this matter. I returned to my seat. The judge deliberated briefly, then pronounced sentence. 12 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 8 with good behavior. Restitution to be paid to all victims, starting with me. Paul was led away, and I felt nothing but tired relief. One more piece of the past finally, officially resolved. Outside, Andrea waited by the car. How do you feel? He asked. Complete. Like I can finally stop looking backwards and just move forward. I took his hand. Ready to go build something new? Always. We drove back to his headquarters, where Teresa had gathered the team for a strategic planning session. More former Volkov operations to acquire and restructure, more opportunities to build legitimate enterprises from criminal foundations, more chances to reshape parts of the city's economy. I presented analysis on 3 potential acquisitions, fielded questions, debated strategy with people who'd learned to trust my judgment. This was my team now, my world, the life I'd built from the ashes of what had been destroyed. After the meeting, Andrea and I retreated to his office. Vincent found something interesting, he said, pulling up files on his computer. Remember how I said the Volkovs weren't the only criminal organization in this city? I remember. There's a family operating out of the West Side. Smaller than the Volkovs were, but growing. And their financial structures look suspicious. Very suspicious. He showed me corporate diagrams, shell companies, revenue streams that didn't quite add up. I studied them, that familiar analytical excitement building. This looks like the same methodology Paul used. Shell companies hiding debt, inflated assets, fake revenue from self-dealing. Someone learned from the Volkov playbook. Can you prove it? Give me a week. If the fraud is there, I'll find it. And if you do find it, then we decide whether to expose it, exploit it, or approach them about restructuring before they collapse under their own criminal weight. I looked at him. Depends on whether they're worth saving or just destroying. Strategic. Ruthless when necessary. Mercy when it serves our interests. He smiled. You've learned well. I had a good teacher. Partner. Not teacher. We're equals in this. Then, as your equal partner, I'm telling you this new organization is going to be a problem within 6 months if we don't address it. Better to move proactively than reactively. Agreed. Make it your priority. Over the next week, I tore apart the West Side organization's financial structures with the same thoroughness I'd applied to the Volkov conspiracy. Found the fraud, documented the evidence, built a case that could either destroy them or force them to negotiate. Andrea arranged a meeting. Neutral territory, careful security, the kind of sit-down where empires either went to war or found accommodation. The West Side boss was younger than I expected, maybe 40, sharp and cautious. He brought 2 advisors. We brought Teresa and Vincent. You've been analyzing our operations, he said without preamble. Found things we'd prefer stayed hidden. Found evidence of systematic fraud that will collapse your organization within 6 months, I corrected. Shell companies, fake assets, debt you're hiding from investors and partners. The same methodology that destroyed the Volkovs. And you're here to what? Threaten us? Demand payment to keep quiet. We're here to offer you a choice, Andrea said. Continue as you are and collapse spectacularly when the fraud catches up to you. Or restructure, go legitimate, convert criminal operations into actual businesses. We've done it successfully with a dozen former Volkov enterprises. We can help you do the same. In exchange for what? Partnership. Strategic cooperation. You operate in territories we don't control, markets we don't access. Work with us instead of against us. Convert your operations to legitimate businesses, and we all profit more than we would from conflict. The West Side boss studied us carefully. You're offering to help us go straight. We're offering to help you survive and profit. Whether that's straight depends on your definition. Andrea slid a folder across the table. These are terms. Fair, strategic, mutually beneficial. Review them, discuss with your people, let us know. We left the meeting without waiting for an immediate answer. Either they'd see the wisdom in cooperation, or they'd collapse on their own, and we'd acquire the wreckage. Win either way. You enjoyed that, I said as we drove away. Building instead of just destroying? Yes, I enjoyed it. Turns out there's profit in cooperation when you approach it strategically.
Who taught you that?
A brilliant analyst who keeps reminding me that sustainable success beats short-term victory. Smart woman. The smartest. That night, we returned to the safe house that had become home. Comfortable, secure, filled with the life we'd built together. Andrea cooked while I reviewed financial reports, working side by side in easy companionship. I've been thinking, he said over dinner, about the future, about what we're building. And 6 months ago, we were fighting for survival. Now we're choosing our battles, building enterprises, creating something that might actually last. That's not normal for my world. Criminal empires usually last a generation if they're lucky. We're building something different. Because we're not just a criminal empire. We're a hybrid, operating in gray spaces, converting criminal operations to legitimate businesses, using strategic advantage without crossing major legal lines. It's sustainable in ways pure criminal enterprise isn't. It's also risky. The federal government watches us carefully. One wrong move, one step too far into criminal territory, and everything we've built becomes evidence against us. So, we don't take that step. We stay smart, stay careful, stay just inside the lines that matter. He reached across the table, took my hand. I'm saying this is working. Us, the business, the partnership. I want to keep building it. Keep building with you. Is this the pragmatic businessman talking or something else? Both. Pragmatically, you're the best strategic partner I've ever had. Personally, you're the only person I've let this close in 15 years. Both of those things matter. I squeezed his hand. Then we keep building. Together. As long as it works for both of us.
Deal.
Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and marveled at the strangeness of my life. 6 months ago, invisible waitress. Now, partner to a powerful man, respected consultant, woman who'd rebuilt her entire existence from nothing. You're thinking too loud, Andrea murmured, pulling me closer. Just processing. It's been quite a journey. Regrets? Not one. You? Only that I didn't walk into Celestine 6 months earlier. We could have built this sooner. We built it when we were ready. Timing was right. He kissed the top of my head, and we drifted towards sleep wrapped around each other, safe and satisfied, and ready for whatever came next. My phone buzzed one last time. Teresa, with a message. Westside just accepted the partnership terms. We're meeting next week to formalize details. I smiled in the darkness. Another victory. Another step forward. Another piece of the city reshaped into something better than it had been. This was my life now. Building empires from ruins, finding justice in gray spaces, partnering with a dangerous man to create something neither of us could have built alone. And I wouldn't change a single thing. So hey, if you've made it this far, thank you for coming on this journey with me. It's been wild, terrifying, exhilarating, everything I needed it to be. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible or destroyed or like the system failed you, I hope it reminded you that you're stronger than the people who tried to break you. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about survival, redemption, and refusing to stay broken. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own strength. And leave a comment telling me what you thought because, honestly, your engagement means everything. Where are you watching from? What's your story of rebuilding after destruction? I'd love to hear it. Until next time, remember that being knocked down doesn't mean staying down. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better than what they destroyed.
Take care of yourselves out there.
Stay strong. Stay smart. And never let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. This is Amelia Mercer, signing off.